"Get out of my house." The woman's voice echoed through Graceland's marble halls at 2 a.m. Elvis Presley stood frozen at the top of his staircase, watching his weekend guests destroy their 25-year marriage right in his living room. Margaret Collins, a woman he'd known since his early days in Memphis, was pointing an accusing finger at her husband Robert, her face streaked with tears and twisted with rage. 25 years, Robert. 25 years of your lies, she screamed, throwing her wedding ring across the room where it bounced off the grand piano with a sharp ping. Elvis gripped the banister tighter, his heart breaking as he witnessed the complete devastation of what had once been the happiest couple he knew. Just 12 hours earlier, they had arrived at Graceland for what was supposed to be a celebration of their silver wedding anniversary, a surprise gift Elvis had arranged after learning they could never afford to visit his home. Now, everything was falling apart. Robert Collins stood in the middle of the living room, his shoulders slumped in defeat, holding a crumpled piece of paper that had apparently started this whole nightmare. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "Margaret, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you've been lying to me for our entire marriage. Explain how everything I thought I knew about you is a lie." Margaret's voice cracked with the weight of betrayal. Elvis had never felt more helpless. Here was a man who could command the attention of millions, who could make crowds of thousands scream his name, yet he was watching two people he cared about tear each other apart, and didn't know how to stop it. Margaret and Robert Collins had been childhood sweethearts in Tupelo, Mississippi, the same small town where Elvis had been born. They had married young, just like Elvis's own parents, and had built a simple life together working at the local textile mill. Robert had always been a quiet, hard-working man, while Margaret was the vibrant one, the woman who had taught Sunday school and organized every church social in their small community. When Elvis became famous, he never forgot the people from his hometown who had known him before the fame. The Collins couple had always been special to him because they reminded him of what real love looked like. Unlike the Hollywood relationships he saw crumble around him daily, Robert and Margaret had something genuine, something lasting, or so he had thought. "Mr. Elvis," Margaret had said when they arrived that morning, her eyes bright with excitement as she admired the mansion's opulent decorations. "I can't believe we're really here. Robert has been saving up for this trip for 3 years. Robert had smiled shyly, his weathered hands fidgeting with his hat. "Margaret's been talking about visiting Graceland since she first heard your music on the radio back in '54. I wanted to make her dreams come true for our anniversary." Elvis had embraced them both, genuinely happy to see these good people finally able to experience a little luxury. He had given them the full tour, shared stories about his mother Gladys, and even played some unreleased songs on his piano while Margaret wept with joy. The day had been perfect. Until dinner, they had been sitting in the dining room sharing stories and laughing over Elvis's famous peanut butter and banana sandwiches, when a young man had appeared at the front door. He was maybe 25, tall and lanky, with Robert's exact same eyes and chin. "I'm looking for Robert Collins," the young man had said to the security guard. "I was told he might be here." When Robert saw the young man, all color had drained from his face. Margaret had noticed immediately. "Robert, who is that? Do you know him?" The young man had introduced himself as David Morrison, and he had carried with him a letter that would destroy everything. Elvis learned the truth as he listened from the staircase. 26 years ago, before Robert married Margaret, he had a brief relationship with another woman, a woman he had met while working construction in Memphis. When she became pregnant, Robert panicked. He was young, scared, and already deeply in love with Margaret. The woman, claiming she didn't want to trap him, had left Memphis without telling him she was pregnant. For 25 years, Robert had no idea he had a son. David Morrison had grown up believing his father was dead. It was only when his mother passed away the previous month that she left him a letter with the truth. She had loved Robert enough to let him go, believing he would be happier with Margaret. But she had also loved their son enough to leave him away to find his father if he ever wanted to. So you see, Margaret had said through her tears after David left, and Robert explained everything. Our entire marriage has been built on a lie. You had a child with another woman, and you never told me. How many other secrets are you keeping, Robert? None, Robert had pleaded. Margaret, I swear to you, I didn't know. I would have told you if I had known. You have to believe me. But Margaret was beyond hearing. The shock of learning her husband had a 25-year-old son, a son who was actually older than their marriage, had shattered her world completely. As Elvis watched the scene unfold from the staircase, he thought about his own parents. He remembered his father Vernon's stories about the early days of his marriage to Gladys, how they had faced their own share of secrets and misunderstandings. He thought about all the couples he had watched over the years, some who survived their storms and some who didn't. Most importantly, he thought about what Gladys had always told him. Elvis, honey, love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing to stay when things get imperfect. Slowly, Elvis descended the staircase. Both Robert and Margaret looked up at him with embarrassment and shame. I'm sorry, Elvis, Margaret said, wiping her eyes. We shouldn't be doing this in your home. We'll leave in the morning. No, Elvis said quietly, his voice carrying that gentle authority that had calmed millions. You'll leave when this is fixed, not before. He walked over to where Margaret's wedding ring lay on the floor beside the piano and picked it up. The simple gold band caught the soft light from the chandelier above. Margaret, Elvis said, how old were you when you met Robert? 17, she answered, confused by the question. And Robert, how old were you? 18, Robert replied. Elvis nodded thoughtfully. So you were just babies. Both of you, and Robert, this relationship you had. When was it? I was 17, Robert admitted. The summer before I met Margaret. I was working construction in Memphis, trying to save money for college. Elvis sat down on the piano bench, still holding the ring. So let me get this straight. A 17-year-old boy, away from home for the first time, had a brief relationship with a girl who left town without telling him she was pregnant. And you're ready to throw away 25 years of marriage because of something that happened when you were practically children. Margaret's anger flared again. It's not about what happened then, Elvis. It's about the lies. What lies? Elvis asked gently. Robert just told you he didn't know about the boy. The woman never told him. How can you lie about something you don't know? He should have told me about her, Margaret insisted. About the relationship. Elvis stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Graceland gardens where he had spent so many peaceful evenings. Margaret, I want you to think about something. In all these 25 years, has Robert ever given you a reason not to trust him? Margaret was quiet for a moment. No, she whispered. Has he ever lied to you about anything else? No. Has he been a good husband to you? Tears began flowing again. Yes. And if he had told you about this girl when you first met, a girl who had already left his life, would it have changed how you felt about him? Margaret considered this. I don't know. Maybe not. Elvis turned back to face them both. I've been in this business long enough to see every kind of relationship you can imagine. I've seen people lie, cheat, and betray each other in ways that would break your heart. But I've also seen real love, the kind that survives anything because it's built on something stronger than perfection. He walked over to Robert, who was sitting with his head in his hands. "Robert, look at me." Robert raised his eyes, red with unshed tears. "Do you love your wife?" "More than life itself," Robert said without hesitation. "And Margaret?" Elvis turned to her. "Do you love your husband?" "Yes," she sobbed. "But how can I trust him now?" Elvis sat down beside her on the couch. "Let me tell you something about trust. Trust isn't about never having secrets or never making mistakes. Trust is about believing in someone's heart, even when their past isn't perfect." He handed her the wedding ring. "This young man, David, he's not your enemy, Margaret. He's an innocent person who just found out his whole life story was different than he thought. And Robert didn't betray you. He was betrayed too by a woman who loved him enough to let him go, but didn't trust him enough to tell him the truth." Margaret stared at the ring in her palm. "I don't know how to move past this, Elvis. Everything feels different now." "It doesn't have to feel different," Elvis said. "What if instead of seeing this as an ending, you saw it as a beginning? You've got a 25-year-old stepson you never knew you had. A young man who needs family just as much as you need to know your family is complete." He stood up and walked to his piano, running his fingers over the keys. "You know, when I first started performing, I was terrified that people would find out about my family's struggles. We were poor, we had made mistakes, we had secrets. But I learned something important. It's not about having a perfect past, it's about choosing to build a better future." Elvis began playing softly, not one of his famous songs, but a gentle hymn that Margaret recognized from their church back in Tupelo. As the familiar melody filled the room, something shifted in the atmosphere. "Margaret," Robert said quietly, "I know this changes things. I know it's not what you signed up for when you married me. But that boy, David, he's a part of me, which means he could be a part of us. If you'll let him, if you'll let me earn your trust back." Margaret looked at her husband through her tears. She saw the same man she had fallen in love with 26 years ago, the same gentle hands that had built their house, the same kind eyes that had looked at her with love every morning for 25 years, the same heart that had somehow produced a son he never knew existed. "He has your eyes," she whispered. "Yeah," Robert smiled through his tears. "He does." Elvis stopped playing and turned to face them. "Love isn't about being perfect, folks. It's about being real, and sometimes being real means accepting that life is more complicated than we planned." Margaret slipped the wedding ring back on her finger. "If we do this, if we try to make this work, I want to meet him properly. I want to know David. I want to understand who he is." "I'd like that too," Robert said. "I'd like us all to be a family, if that's possible." Elvis smiled, feeling the weight lift from the room. "I think it's not only possible, I think it's meant to be." The next morning, Elvis found Margaret and Robert sitting together on Graceland's front porch, watching the sunrise. They were holding hands, something they hadn't done when they arrived. "Feeling better?" Elvis asked, settling into a chair beside them. "Different," Margaret said, "but better. We called David," Robert added. "He's driving down from Memphis this afternoon. Margaret wants to cook dinner for him." Elvis nodded approvingly. "That sounds perfect." "Elvis," Margaret said, "I need to apologize for last night, for the things I said, for the way I acted in your home." "Nothing to apologize for," Elvis waved his hand. You reacted like any person would when their world got turned upside down. The important thing is what you choose to do next. Robert squeezed his wife's hand. We're choosing love. We're choosing family. Even when it's complicated, Elvis asked with a smile. Especially when it's complicated, Margaret replied. That afternoon, David Morrison returned to Graceland. This time he wasn't a stranger carrying shocking news. He was Margaret and Robert's son, coming home to meet his family. Elvis watched from his window as Margaret hugged the young man, as Robert showed him family photos, as three people who had been strangers that morning began the beautiful, messy work of becoming a family. 6 months later, Elvis received a letter from the Collins family. David had moved to Tupelo to be closer to his parents. Margaret had become the mother he had always dreamed of having. Robert had found a joy he never knew was missing. They were planning to visit Graceland again for their 26th anniversary, this time as a family of 3. The letter included a photo, Margaret, Robert and David standing together in front of their small house in Tupelo, all 3 of them wearing matching smiles. On the back, Margaret had written, "Thank you for teaching us that love isn't about having a perfect story. It's about choosing to keep writing the story together." Elvis kept that photo on his piano for the rest of his life, a reminder that sometimes the most important performances aren't on stage in front of thousands. Sometimes they're in your living room at 2 a.m., helping 2 people remember why they fell in love in the first place. The night Elvis saved a marriage, he learned something important about love that he would carry with him forever. It's not about avoiding the storms, it's about learning to dance in the rain together.